This is WellSeeker Pro training to cover databases, backing up databases, WellSeeker export files, and Compass export files. WellSeeker Pro is the software. Effectively, it's the brain of the operation. But much like the human brain, it needs information to make calculations based upon. Where that information is stored in the case of WellSeeker is the WellSeeker database file that you have selected at any given moment. You can see on my desktop here, this is a WellSeeker database file that is provided with this training material, and it's a .mdb file. So I'm going to select my WellSeeker database by opening up WellSeeker Pro, File, Select, and finding the location of the database I want to open. This points WellSeeker Pro at that data source. So into this database, we put our well information, whatever reporting data we might have, and over time this accumulates in size. Currently, for a local database, this .mdb file, it is only stored in this one location. There will be times where you need to make backups of this data. The best way to back up WellSeeker Pro database is to go to File, Backup Database. What this does is it opens up a dialog, and you can then name what you want your backup of that database to be called. So I'm just going to call it, in this case, backup. Save it on my desktop and hit save. Database successfully backed up. Effectively what that's done is create an exact copy of this database file and duplicated it there with a different name. So these are two exact copies, the only difference is the title. If you want to then open up your backup database, you go select database, select the backup, and away you go. So that backup could either be stored for backup purposes, in case there's an issue going down the line, or it could then be sent to a colleague or moved to a different computer. There will be scenarios, however, where you don't want to back up or send a complete database, particularly if it's excessively large. You will want to be given the option to take parts of your database and move that to other databases. And this functionality is covered by the export file. So I'm just going to expand my database tree. An export file can be created from any level within WellSeeker by selecting that level, right-clicking and going Import Export and selecting Export. What that will do is it will take all the information from that level down. In this case, it would export all the data in my database to an export file format. If I selected at plan level, right-clicked and hit Export, it would only export the relevant data for this particular plan, i.e. it would export my plan, the well level for 3H, the facility level for 3H, the field level, and the operator level, but it would not export any of 1H, 2H, 4H, 5H, 6H, 7H, or 8H information. It would be specifically for that plan. So by selecting the appropriate level for your export file to be created, you can manipulate what data will appear in that export file. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for my plan right now. And you'll see automatically your export file is named with this nomenclature, and it's important to keep it in this way because you can then tell the difference between an export file and a database file. The export file will by default have export and the date at which it was created and the time. I'm going to hit save. Export successful. So we can now see we've created an export file. As I say, it looks identical to a database on the surface of it. It is also a .mdb file, but with the nomenclature that it's given automatically, you can tell it's an export file because it's in the title. So what's the difference between a database and an export file? Well, other than being able to segregate levels of well data from your database, that is all an export file contains. It contains the information for that well and any of the levels above that, the critical data, well information. A well seeker database file contains far more information than an export file. For example, it contains all of the potential CRSs within well seeker as opposed to just the CRS associated with the well data in an export file. It also contains various other tables to do with the functionality and options within a database that do not get exported in an export file. So those things are different in a database to an export file. i.e. an export only gives the critical information for the well data. If I tried, for example, to select the export file and open it up as a database, well seeker tells me database file is an import file. Create a new database and then import. So I can't directly select an export file using well seeker because it doesn't contain enough information to fulfill the job of a database. So what I'm going to do is I'll carry out the instructions that the message just told me to take. I'm going to go File, Create New Database, and I'm just going to call it Test. Okay, I've successfully created my database. Now I'm going to go File, Select Database, and select the database I've just created, Test. Hit Open. And now I've got a fresh, blank database. In our blank database, we're now in a position to pull in our export file. But before we do that, we've got a dialog of settings to bear in mind. The well seeker / compass import settings. So this dialog gives us the option of how we deal with data when we're pulling it in. Now, if you refer back to earlier training regarding the well seeker database overview, every single level of the well seeker database tree has to be named uniquely. If we have information in our database already, and then we pull in export data, during that import process, if well seeker finds any duplicate named operators, facilities, fields, wells, actual wells, planned wells, surveys, depth datums, daily records, anything in this list, if it finds a duplicate name of that, it will give us an option to be informed about it, in this case ask, to always overwrite by default without giving you an option, or to never overwrite, i.e. don't give us an option, but always create an exact copy but with a name change. In this case, you would get a duplicate with the number 2 after it. So this is where you set your warning level effectively when you bring in exported data. And that is to avoid duplicate data and give you the option to overwrite existing data. So I've got all of those set to inform me when I have duplicates found in my database versus the export. Now right now I've got a blank database, so I'm not expecting, if I import, to have many issues. So I'm going to right click on well seeker database and go to import export. I'm going to import. And select my export file, which is denoted by export in the title, and select open. And this is one of those warning messages. Duplicate coordinates reference system found. Do you wish to overwrite all duplicates? Well, I'm happy that the coordinates reference system in my export is correct data for this system, so I'm going to select yes. And what that does is it effectively overrides that coordinates reference system data that I had in my database originally with the data that's in the export. Now I know in this case they're one and the same, but it gives the user the option of saying no if they're not sure about the source of the data and what data that contains. Okay, to reiterate that point, I'm going to pull in the same export file again. So we already have all of the data from that export file has been pulled in. We're going to pull in exactly the same data again. by going right-clicking on WellSeeker database, hit import, export, and go to import. I'll select my export file again, and this time it says we found a duplicate operator, because previously the database tree was blank. This time it's saying, well, we found your operator existing is this name, and the one in the export file you're trying to pull in is this name. Do you wish to overwrite? And as I said, I already know that these two sets of data are identical. I don't want to create another copy, so I'm going to select yes, I want to overwrite. Same for the field, same for the facility, same for the well, same for the planned well. Okay, and because I've got all those options set to ask, all of these various different table levels, I get asked and given the option whether I want to create duplicates. In this case, I selected I do not want to create duplicates, I want to overwrite the existing data. So now I'm going to show you what happens if I select no to the import option, i.e. I don't want to overwrite my existing data, I want to pull in a copy of that. So if you right-click on WellSeeker database, go to Import Export and select Import. Select our export file and hit Open. So this time, instead of going yes, I want to overwrite my existing operator with the operator in the export file of the same name, I'm going to select no. I'm going to do that to all of the messages I receive. Import successful. You can see what WellSeeker has done, even though these have got identical names, in order to keep the name of the data that's been imported unique, it's added brackets to close brackets. And if I expand this, it's done exactly the same for every other level. Now, obviously, this is not a good way to build up a database because we've got two sets of identical data with the exclusion of the name now. But it does give the user the option, if they're not sure what is in that export file that they're pulling in, it gives them a chance to create another copy of it without overriding their existing data and visualize it to make sure there's nothing sinister there. If they were then happy, they could go ahead and delete the data that they pulled in and then override again, so you've only got the one copy. But that's what the yes and no options allow you to do with export files. If you didn't want to see any of these options at all, the warning messages once you pull in the export file, you can go to File, WellSeeker Compass Import Settings, and select all of these to always overwrite. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this because you could potentially overwrite something that you weren't aware of was in a large export file. So for example, if you've got a very large database and you're pulling in an export file, you're not really sure what's in that export file content, it would just go ahead and overwrite everything that matches in your database with everything that matches name-wise in the export file, and you wouldn't be aware of what's being overwritten. So now I've changed all of those to always overwrite. Go to import again, and this time it doesn't give me any options of whether I want to overwrite duplicate names. Again, this only applies for duplicates. If you're pulling in brand new data of database tree levels that are totally unique and don't match anything that's currently in your database, you won't get any warning messages anyway. Another thing I'd like to point out about export files is you can obviously import as many export files into a database as you like. It's not limited to having a clean database to start with and pulling one in. You can have a very full database full of thousands of wells and pull in multiple export files. There are no issues in doing that. Up to this point, we've covered databases, backing up databases, and WellSeeker Pro export files. There is another option of getting data into WellSeeker Pro, and that is the Compass export file, or Compass EDM file. Compass export files are files that are created in Landmark's Compass software. Effectively, what it does is the same job as WellSeeker's export file, but for Compass. So it exports the different database tree level information. On my desktop here, I have an example of a Compass export file. In this case, it's called example.edm.xml. This is an entirely different format to WellSeeker export files. It is from a third-party software, and as such, we don't have control of the format of that. So WellSeeker has to treat this file differently than it would native files from WellSeeker. As such, we have an entirely different import process. For a WellSeeker export file, you would right-click anywhere in the database tree and go to Import Export. To pull in a Compass export file, we would have to go to File, and there's a separate section of options for Compass export files. Because it's a third-party file set, we have to treat it differently to WellSeeker imports, and as such, we've got a separate dialog of Compass import settings. Within the Compass import settings, we tell WellSeeker Pro how to utilize the information within that Compass export file. So within targets and lease lines, if they're checked, it will pull in the various items. If they're unchecked, they will not. So currently I have import targets selected, import lease lines selected, and assign lease lines selected. Within a Compass export file, all of the targets are pulled down from field level. So you might be pulling in one well's worth of data, but you will be, if you have the import target selected, you will be pulling in every single target from field level down. So you could end up with thousands of targets, which is why we've put in the option here for the user to either import or not import targets. The same scenario happens with lease lines. It will pull in all the lease lines from field level down. Survey tools. With this checked, any instrument performance models, i.e. the survey tools that are used to calculate the ellipses of uncertainty, will be pulled in to WellSeeker if it does not currently exist within WellSeeker. If you uncheck that, those IPMs will not be created within WellSeeker. Naming conventions. This is very important. As discussed in previous training, it is essential that every level of the WellSeeker database tree have unique naming. So we cannot have duplicate names of anything within the WellSeeker database tree. Within Compass, you can have duplicate names within the database tree, i.e. you can have two wells under different fields called 1H. In order to avoid there being an issue in this scenario, pulling in Compass data into WellSeeker, we've added in these checkboxes. What they effectively do is they append the operator name to the field to make sure the field is kept unique under each operator, that the field name gets appended to the facility, and that the facility name gets appended to the well. This does make the names longer, but it will maintain a unique naming system between Compass and WellSeeker. Well plans. This option allows you to select all well plans from the Compass export file and have them pulled in. So if there are 15 revisions of a plan under a well, all 15 revisions will get pulled in. If you only want to see the most recent principal plan selected within Compass, then check this box. For our example, I'm going to have every single checkbox selected for pulling in our Compass export file. Once you're happy with your settings, hit apply. Before I pull in my Compass import file, I'm going to create a new database, and I'm going to call it Compass Import Test Database. I'm now going to select the database I just created. Now that my database is created, I'm going to go File and Import Compass EDM file. If you're in a scenario where you have multiple Compass EDM files that you want to pull in at once, you can use the batch EDM import function. And that will effectively do the same job as the Compass import process, but it will just repeat it through whatever files you have selected. The caveat of this is that you have to have all of the Compass EDM files in the same folder location so that it can be selected. So again, I'm going to do File and Import Compass EDM file. I'm going to select my EDM file and hit Open. WellSeeker has now pulled in the information from the Compass export file into WellSeeker using the settings that we selected earlier. When you open up a backup WellSeeker database file, or when you pull in a WellSeeker Pro export file, you don't have to do extensive data checking to make sure it's coming correctly. And that's because a WellSeeker file is being pulled into WellSeeker, and you can be assured that all of the information is pulled in correctly. The only checks you might have to do are just verify that the correct plans are in place and things like that, i.e. checking for user error when the well planner gave you the information versus what it intends you to have. With a Compass export file, it's mildly different. The reason being is Compass export file is a third-party file that Innova have no control over, and as such, when information is pulled in from a Compass export file, it should be validated and checked that information has been pulled across correctly. For these checks, I would normally start with the bottom line of the plan or actual wellbore in question. So I'm just going to expand, open up my plan, and I would take the Compass planning report in whatever format it is given by the well planner, and I would check the bottom line versus what's in WellSeeker. I would check also the local coordinates and the geographic coordinates. If those are pulled in correctly, that actually confirms that an awful lot of information has been pulled in correctly. If they don't match, then you'll obviously have to go dig a bit deeper and find out where the discrepancy is. Once I've checked the bottom line, I would then go ahead and methodically check the various different levels of the database tree. So I'd start at operator and work my way down. I'd verify that the anti-collision settings have been pulled across correctly. You can check the Compass anti-collision report from your well planner for this information. I would check the field level. Now, checking the bottom line geographic coordinates, if they tie in, then you can be pretty sure that your coordinates reference system will be correct, but I'd verify that anyway, as well as your north reference and local coordinate system and your system vertical data information. At the facility level or pad, all of this stuff is fixed at field level, so check your facility center and facility location uncertainty values compared to Compass. At the wellhead level, check again your wellhead coordinates and your depth reference information that you have available. And then at your plan or actual wellbore and surveys levels, check that all the information has been pulled in correctly. That being the vertical section, your magnetics data, your survey programs, and any sidetrack information and tie-on information. One thing I didn't point out, at the wellhead level, you would also check your location uncertainty values. Once you've verified all that information has pulled in correctly, then you can be happy that the Compass import process has worked correctly for the well data. Something else you can go ahead and do is visualize where your plans are in relation to your well. So effectively, if I open up the plan view, is probably best for that. And you can go ahead and open up the targets, go back up to field level, see that there are targets and lease lines available. I'll just activate these. So they are associated with our plan. And I'll go ahead and view those on my chart. Okay, and I can see now that my targets and my lease lines look like they've pulled in correctly as well from the Compass export file. In summary, we've covered databases, backing up a database, WellSeeker Pro export files and Compass export files, the differences between them all and their utilization within WellSeeker Pro. We're now going to move on to questions and answers and an exercise. Now onto the questions and answers section. What is the difference between a WellSeeker Pro database file and an export file? And the answer is a database file contains all of the information WellSeeker Pro requires to function, whereas an export file only contains well data. Okay, next question. Are Compass export files the same as WellSeeker Pro export files? The answer is no. They're a completely different format of file from a third-party software. As such, the information in Compass export files should be quality checked more thoroughly than WellSeeker export files. Next question. You've pulled in a Compass export file, but your targets are missing. What could be causing this? The answer is ensure that Compass import settings has the import targets checkbox selected. We now reach the exercise phase of the training. First stage is open the provided WellSeeker Pro database. Once you've got it opened within WellSeeker Pro, create a database backup file and save to a suitable folder location. Once you've done that, select the newly created backup database within WellSeeker Pro so that you are now utilizing that backup database. Once you're in that backup database, create a WellSeeker Pro export file. Then create and select a new database file entirely. Once you're in that new database file, import the WellSeeker Pro export file you just created into this new blank database. The next step is go to File and WellSeeker/Compass import settings and adjust the settings and re-import the WellSeeker Pro export file. You will then see how the warning messages change based upon your selections from the WellSeeker/Compass import settings dialog. Next, repeat that step until you're comfortable with how WellSeeker Pro deals with duplicate names and how the user has control over how it's handled. So just keep changing settings, pulling in those export files until you are 100% happy with how it works. Next, if your company has access to Compass export files, select the appropriate Compass import settings. Again, if you've got access to Compass export files, go ahead and import a Compass export file. And then after that, verify that the data has been imported correctly by verifying against Compass reports. Once you've completed that, that is the end of the exercise for this stage of training. If at any point you become stuck, refer back to the video for a refresher on any individual points. That is the end of the WellSeeker Pro database backup and export files section.